storage is encroaching into distribution. And not only is it encroaching into distribution because of a lack of sites, but it's also increasing into distribution because of the move towards resiliency and really the ability for networks to build at the grid edge. And so noise is absolutely becoming a really big factor.
I now have Andy Tang, Vice President of Wärtsilä Energy Storage and Optimization and true OG in the industry, on the stage. If you haven't listened to his episode of SunCast, I wish I could remember the number, maybe you do. It is a deep dive on how innovation is changing our sector from the inside out and how the grid is being optimized and expanded with assets like batteries. With over 12.5 gigawatt hours of contracted systems, including 8.5 gigawatt hours already in operation, Wärtsilä Energy Storage and Optimization is looking to further establish its footprint in the US, Canada, Chile, the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, Taiwan, and Australia. There's a reason I named them all. You'll learn in just a moment. And with nearly 2 decades of experience in battery storage and grid edge development, Andy and his team have long established themselves as key market movers. Have you counted yet which number RE Plus or SPI this is for you?
Oh, my God. It's got to be at least 10.
10?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Did you, when you were back
And then, of course, the associated shows in Europe as well.
Oh, my goodness.
So then it doubles.
Yeah. Did you attend SPI back when you were at PG&E?
Of course.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. You were doing a lot on EV and grid edge. You've been in this space a long time, watching how the utility and the distributed energy resources sector are having that interplay.
Yeah, really, it started with a lot of work on smart meters.
Yeah.
So I deployed the first large-scale smart meter deployment in the United States, 5 million smart meters in the Northern California area in the PG&E service territory. And that was really the beginning of the move towards digitization.
Yeah.
That is like, how do you get data from the grid edge, and how do you turn that into something that's actionable?
Yeah. And your post PG&E, Greensmith, which is now the energy storage side of Wärtsilä, the energy storage and optimization piece many years ago, one of the first acquisitions into the space by a big player. I think it was
7 years and 2 months ago.
Can you believe it? 7 years and 2 months.
7 years and 2 months ago.
The market really is moving faster than ever at a pace that I'm sure 7 years and 2 months ago you could have only imagined and hoped for. How does this rapid pace impact the total cost of ownership for your customers? I have to imagine that there are some hidden costs at this pace of growth.
It's all been very good. I mean, if you think about it, we introduced our quantum product line in, I think it was 2019. Yeah. And that product has served us really well for 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? But now, with the rapid pace of innovation, the number of changes in battery chemistry, the really understanding of the total cost of ownership and how that's shifting, we actually have introduced 2 new product iterations this year. So we introduced a Quantum 2 earlier in the year, which is a high energy dense DC block.
Right.
And then we just followed up the week before this show. We announced our Quantum 3, which is an AC integrated block, fully self-contained and factory built.
Yeah, we had a fantastic conversation yesterday with Dave Hebert and Neha Sinha from your team on the necessity of maintaining both the AC and the DC block, introducing the AC and how they synergize together.
But maybe back to your question more directly. I mean, we are seeing incredible amounts of rapid innovation. Just walk the floor and take a look. And I think that's all positive. But I think that if you look at other periods of rapid innovation in related technologies, let's say telecom or semiconductors or the other areas, you will see that rapid innovation, and you will see products that really make a mark, and then you will see products that miss the mark. And I think that's all part of the system of capitalism that we are all in here, where everyone gets to take their ideas, turn them into product, and then see what the market actually delivers.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that I see a lot on the floor is there's been this rush to energy density.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks, okay, I get it. There's a certain amount of cost, and the more battery you can for an enclosure, and the more battery you can cram into that enclosure, the better your economics are going to be. I mean, obvious, right? The challenge you have though is and you can see that many of these solutions have not been designed by integrators. So, what does an integrator do? Well, an integrator understands the total system.
Yeah.
Every individual component. And what we're actually seeing is we see a lot of subcomponent vendors in a system that look at it and say, okay, I can optimize my piece. But they ignore the requirements of what the downstream impacts are, or whether or not they're actually pushing costs onto other people.
Yeah.
So I think that the greatest example of this would be the advent of the 6 megawatt hour container.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something like it's over 50 tons in shipping weight, right?
Yeah.
And
it changes the dynamic of what you have to consider to get it from one place to the other.
Exactly. And so the challenge on that is there are many ports that cannot handle a 50-ton unit.
There are roads that can't handle.
There are roads that can't handle a unit. There are agreements or requirements from many municipalities, to put it casually, you break it, you fix it.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
if your road breaks, by transporting these containers to site, the IPP or the EPC, the IPP is responsible for fixing it.
Yeah.
Right? Even like little small things like the availability of cranes that can hoist the additional weight, they're not in as large supply. So your EPC costs go up. So in general, while they have saved on the costs of the energy density at the box unit level, they've just pushed all those costs onto other people. Well, and in some cases, it may be impossible.
Yeah, well, it seems to me we're in some way in a reversion because back in the day when Greensmith 7.5 years ago was operating independently, a lot of stuff was integrated. You were notably the best integrator in the market. You were integrating all these components in the field. And what happens is if you can't get 50 tons to the project site, then it has to come in components, right? So are we reverting back to the way we used to do things, and what are some of the implications that might be found there?
One of my colleagues at Wärtsilä likes to say that the old way of doing things was putting the factory in the field.
Right.
We willingly took the factory and put it out into the field. And I think it was a very positive step when we took the factory out of the field, put it back in the factory, manufactured things, and then moved that to the field.
Yep.
Right. Tested. Move that to the field. So in many ways, it's kind of like we're going backwards.
Yeah.
And to quote something that is in the popular press right now, my view is we're not going back.
Yeah.
Now, one of the implications are that with this move to energy density, when we were doing back in the Greensmith days, when we were moving modules and loading them in the field, they were about 220, 250 pounds each module.
What was the amp hour for those cells?
They were 180 amp hour cells.
Okay.
And I think there were like 48 cells in a module pack.
Right.
What we have now, these large modules that we're doing, they're approaching 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, small car.
It's a low-end Mini Cooper.
That's accurate.
Okay, so now imagine that you are that you're shipping components and you have a rack that's empty because it was too heavy to ship the thing.
Yeah.
Now you're expecting the field crews to lift 7 Mini Coopers and install them into the energy storage container.
Yeah, cherry picker can't do that.
Yeah. So it's really and I think it is an example of people that are developing product in a vacuum and not thinking about the end-to-end, how do you get an energy storage system up and running?
Yeah. Something that comes to mind for me, you mentioned 180 amp hours, and I think the standard today is high twos, like 280. We're moving into the 300s. Is the heat component from those cells proportional, linear as the size of the amp hours grow?
Great question. So we introduced our Quantum HE, which is now actually being deployed, and that's based on a 306 amp hour cell.
Okay.
And we have that partnered with 2 of our battery partners that were able to deliver that. The interesting thing is, and yes, as you stated, the industry standard had been a 280 amp hour cell.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that we saw as we were doing the testing that we always do is that the thermal loading or the amount of heat, we expected it to increase, and we expected it to increase linearly from 280 amp hours to 306. The interesting thing is what we discovered is that it wasn't a linear curve. It was a little bit more geometric than that.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I think as we move into that next generation where people are talking about 600 amp hour cells, I think I've got a little bit of pause for concern on that, on whether or not we should be rushing into that, whether or not we should be designing those products right away without having done the thorough and adequate testing first.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting conundrum. There are a number of, I think, stumbling blocks to the breakneck pace of growth that aren't being taken into consideration. We talked yesterday a bit with Dave and Neha about noise and noise attenuation. Are you seeing in other markets, I don't think we've seen it yet in the United States, are you seeing in other markets projects getting hit with ordinances or even complaints for regards to noise?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, to draw a parallel, fire has always been a big focus. Fire safety has always been a big focus in the industry. And that was led by the U.S. I mean, that was led by several of the California AHJs and the NYFD, the New York Fire Department. Yeah. They were all worried for different reasons, but they were all worried about fire safety. And that's an issue that the industry has had to deal with. We've taken a leading position on that. I feel that noise is the next fire.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. And so what's happening is storage has gotten deployed to the point where the easy sites, the low-hanging fruit sites, the ones that are in really desolate or areas where they're away from population centers, those have been developed. And so now storage is encroaching into distribution. Right. And not only is it encroaching into distribution because of a lack of sites, but it's also increasing into distribution because of the move towards resiliency and really the ability for networks to build at the grid edge. And so noise is absolutely becoming a really big factor. We see it more. We do see it though more in Europe than we do in the United States right now, and Australia. Yeah. You've taught me some terms, far field noise requirements, et cetera. I think that there's a dissonance, and in particular, only the sort of the leading edge developers are catching on to this, but there's a difference between what you read on a spec sheet and what the contract the developers held to states. How can you enunciate that? Yeah, absolutely. So the typical spec sheet that you'll see on equipment includes essentially near field noise. Yeah. And so that is a measurement of the noise that an inverter or a container will generate when you're 1 meter away from the container. Right. Okay. However, the ordinances that communities are placing on, they don't really care about how noisy is it if you go up, because these are closed sites and no one's going to go up, right? What they really care about is at the fence border or in the neighboring community, how loud is that noise? That's right. So that concept is called far field noise. Okay. And the issue with far field noise is it's very, very complex. Yeah. It's very complex to model. A lot of environmental impact. So, for instance, the prevailing direction of the wind can impact that. And so what developers are typically and IPPs are typically signing up for are far field noise measurements at particular locations. Right. So there are measuring points that they focus on, and we have to comply to a noise limitation at those measuring points. It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge in the industry right now. How is that noise attenuation being handled? I can't even it's easy for us to think about how the thermal load is being managed. There are different ways from different vectors that you can chill the unit down, but noise is a different thing to contain. Yeah. So the easiest and best way is to limit the noise at the source. Yeah. So we have been working with our partners to develop even more advanced noise kits. Yep. Right. So how you can deaden the noise or how you can limit the decibels on the noise at the source. Yep. Okay. Then the second thing that is starting to become a factor is you actually have to look at site design. So you actually have to look at where the prevailing winds are. Mm-hmm. And then the third factor is product design. So we are looking at various ways. We're working with our chiller company to look at lower noise fans. Yeah. We're looking at actually upsizing the fans so that you run them at a lower speed relative. And therefore that generates less noise. Makes sense. We're looking at venting our products up as opposed to out, because then the prevailing noise goes that way. Yeah. And we're looking at the overall site layout, because if there is a prevailing wind or other environmental factors, slopes and whatnot. Yep. But this is all, you can imagine, this is planning that has to happen way in advance. Indeed.
I mentioned at the outset the very specific markets that you are in or expanding into. And naturally, one wants to take advantage of where you have an existing footprint and a customer base. Could you speak to the strategy of taking a concentrated market approach versus offering your services in all markets?
Yeah. So it wasn't always this way. I'll just be very frank and honest. We were acquired by, Greensmith was acquired by Wärtsilä in 2017. And we were all very, very excited because suddenly we had this company that had a reciprocating engine presence in 175 countries.
Yeah.
Okay, 175. There are only 190 some odd countries recognized by the UN. Okay, so we had this massive global footprint. And so we opened the gates after the acquisition and said, we're selling energy storage everywhere. And we did that for about two and a half years.
Yeah.
And I think the result was that we sold energy storage nowhere. And those places that we did sell
Can't be
energy,
everything to everyone.
Yeah, it can't be everything to everyone. And the places that we did sell energy storage, we, from an execution standpoint, we discovered that energy storage is not a global universal product. Now, everyone thinks it is. That you look at all the containers and they say we can ship anywhere. The reality is the controls aspect of energy storage is not a global universal product.
Yeah.
And even the licensing requirements and everything else is not a global universal product.
Yeah. A couple of questions as we round out. I want to talk about supply chain and then just distilling it down to your typical procurement team and their thoughts on what they should be considering. What are the considerations that are key for your business development in terms of how you're managing your supply chain strategy, especially with regards to the U.S. and the domestic supply?
So we are in the midst of setting up an entirely separate, in essence, it's basically a product line, but an entirely separate supply chain to support the United States market. With the combination of the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022, and then also with the decision by the USTR to increase the Section 301 tariffs from 7.5% to 25%, it has clearly put a bit of a chill on importing products directly from China.
Yeah.
Right. So we in general have looked at this and said, okay, the U.S. is a separate market. A lot of our other markets will continue to source, we will continue to source products from China and deploy them in those markets. Yeah. But in the United States, I think that it is, regardless of the results in November, I think we are on a track where we are trying to build manufacturing in the United States, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. But as a result, that means that as a global supplier, I have to take a separate strategy for the U.S.
Indeed.
And that strategy is going to be twofold. It's going to be for those people that feel, for those customers that feel it is important to have support America and have a domestic product. We will have a IRA compliant domestic solution.
Yeah.
But also, I think that we're coming up with the strategy that I've been facetiously referring to as ABC, anywhere but China. And really, it is about standing up a supply chain where the batteries are manufactured and everything is manufactured in countries that are not China, that the supply chain supporting those batteries are not China.
Yep.
And bringing that in.
Yep.
But there is a reality that the best batteries in the world right now are LFP cells manufactured in China. They have a lock on the technology.
What a conundrum.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, one of the things that, given your experience in the utility, your experience integrating this technology for a decade, I'd love to know from a layperson's perspective, if I'm a procurement manager at developer XYZ, what should I really care about when I'm thinking about how to integrate storage over the next 2 years into my projects?
I think that a bit of caution on chasing the latest, most efficient fad or the latest, most efficient or seemingly cost-effective equipment is probably the tantamount thing.
Yeah.
I think that over the next couple of years, we're going to see increases in 320 amp hour cells and even above that. And I think there are safety considerations that haven't been determined yet or performed yet. So I think that's really one big thing. I think really understanding the system on the whole continues to be the biggest thing. And I think really as you look to choose a vendor, integrity is important. being able to pick up the phone when you're in the construction phase, or being able to pick up the phone when the system's operating, and being able to reliably get someone on the other end of that line. The procurement manager may not find that important, but when he turns that over to the ops manager,
Right.
believe me, the ops manager is going to consider that as a really important factor.
Andy, it's always a pleasure. I love picking your brain. I love hearing your thoughts. You've had such a breadth of experience from your depth of your time at a utility, and now working with developers and utilities for the better part of a decade here. Thank you for coming to share those brain droppings. I've learned a lot in the time that I've spent with you, both here and in many other conversations. I would encourage others, if they want to reach out to you. And thank you so much for supporting us here as well.
Thank
the Power
you,
Up Live
Nico.
stage.
Always have a great time.